Walaakpunuwii. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to NEEKAAWA KIHTAACHIIMUWAK WULAAKWUNUWII. This evening they tell stories. So this is the second the time that this has been held. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that you understood that there's going to be three stories that are going to be shared this evening that originate from Munsee Delaware Nation. And these stories came from the community. And for those that aren't familiar with Munsee, Delaware, it's a small reserve that's located on the Thames River, just about 35 minutes southwest of London, Ontario. And then she.
Walaakpunuwii. Good evening. I'm really happy to see so many people having joined for the second annual Munsee Story Evening, and I hope this will be just the second in a long history of such evenings. In between each of the stories, though, there'll be time for questions and discussion. I've shared that recordings of last year's Munsee Delaware Story Night from last February, which includes readings by two of our speakers last year, are available there. If you go to that page and scroll down a little bit to last February, you'll see recordings there. And I think that's all the housekeeping. Let me turn it back to Ian.
Suzanne, we'll start off with some introductions and perhaps I'll lead, and then I'm going to pass it over to a collaborator, Katherine Chupik-Hall, afterwards. So Walaakpunuwii. Good evening, everyone. Nidashinzi Ian, Ninonjai Nalahii, Shuknawikion Berry, Nawalotamun Wundakwa, Nindalog Sheshko Halawasik Pombilakar. So good evening, everyone. My name is Ian, and I'm from Munsee Delaware Nation. I follow the ways of the Turtle Clan, my mother's clan. But I currently live just north of Barrie, Ontario, between the lovely cities of Barrie and Orillia. And for a daytime job, I do lots of work with school papers. So I work with the Ontario Ministry of Education and the Indigenous Education Office. So what I'll do now is I'm going to pass over to the person who's helping me out this evening, who's collaborated on a lot of these stories. That's Katherine.
Hi, thank you so much, Ian. I'm Katherine. I've provided a lot of the illustration work for the Munsee Delaware community over the years and for a lot of Ian's stories and books. I'm situated in Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh communities, which I'm very grateful to be able to, exist here and be able to provide my work for this evening. Thank you so much.
Anishi, Katherine, and I guess I should have acknowledged the fact that I'm a longtime visitor amongst the people of Chippewas of Rama and Christian Island. So they've gratefully taken me in for almost the last 40 years. I also want to acknowledge a presence that's going to be here in spirit, but is missed in person this evening, and that's my friend and fellow language speaker, Karen Moscow, who passed last September. Many of you will know her from her work that she's done with language classes here in Ontario, but also in the United States. But she's no doubt here in spirit, and she's going to help me with my questionable Central Ontario accent when it comes to working with the language. And as well, I also wanted to extend Kwatanishi big thanks to Maria, Suzanne, and Melissa for hosting and putting this event on. Certainly not something that I would want to accomplish on my own. So I appreciate all their time and effort in putting us together. So I'm going to present the first story, which has the title of Asiiskusiipuw wiichkuneew Munsiiwak. It was the story was sort of debuted back in July of last year for the Munsee Delaware Powwow. It is it's a story that came out of a 2021 journey down the Thames River. So it started off with a bunch of us thinking it was a great idea to paddle from London to Lake St. Clair, not all in one day, but it was an idea that we had amongst community members and a few professors at the University of Western Ontario to sort of talk about the history of the river But actually, while you're on the river, instead of reading a book about it or having a presentation in four walls. So the goal was to actually travel the river in segments in order to get a better sense of the history, culture, and the environment. And we had quite a team. We had Mark Peters, Chief Mark Peters, the late Mark Peters, who was the community historian, and he had just this wealth of knowledge, 65 years of incredible knowledge about the community, but also the journey that the Munsee people made from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, all the way up to Canada. And he's a wonderful guy to sit with in the canoe. I think we both sort of weighed down the canoe a little too much because the river was pretty low, so we had to get out an awful lot. But it did offer that opportunity to have those sort of deeper discussions that, in hindsight, I'm not going to be able to have again. So I was very lucky to be able to be part of that. So I'm going to present the first story, which has the title of Asiiskusiipuw wiichkuneew Munsiiwak. It was the story was sort of debuted back in July of last year for the Munsee Delaware powwow. It is it's a story that came out of a 2021 journey down the Thames River. So it started off with a bunch of us thinking it was a great idea to paddle from London to Lake St. Clair, not all in one day, but it was an idea that we had amongst community members and a few professors at the University of Western Ontario to sort of talk about the history of the river, but actually while you're on the river, instead of reading a book about it or having a presentation in four walls. So the goal was to actually travel the river in segments in order to get a better sense of the history, culture, and the environment. And we had quite a team. We had Mark Peters, Chief Mark Peters, the late Mark Peters, who was the community historian, and he had just this wealth of knowledge, 65 years of incredible knowledge about the community, but also the journey that the Munsee people made from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, all the way up to Canada. And he's a wonderful guy to sit with in the canoe. I think we both sort of weighed down the canoe a little too much because the river was pretty low, so we had to get out an awful lot. But it did offer that opportunity to have those sort of deeper discussions that, in hindsight, I'm not going to be able to have again. So I was very lucky to be able to be part of that. While I was sitting in the queue and not getting out of the canoe at times, what I was trying to do was trying to visualize the work and what's around me in the language as opposed to English. So I was trying to, I guess the word would be, decolonize myself while I'm on this very important tributary that my people traveled or have traveled over the intervening sort of 250 plus years. The story that was created is a blend of it's essentially a takeoff of what we did. So when we traveled down the river, the story is designed to be small snippets of that, and it's supposed to include some of the natural environment, the items, the things that we saw along the river on our journey. It is designed as a language learner's text. So this piece was designed with intermediate speakers in mind. So it's my sort of future goal is to build all these resources that when I leave this green earth, that there's a wide variety of materials for the community learners. And as we go through it, you'll see that it's in two languages only. So it's in Munsee language, and it's the Munsee language is in bold print. The English is in a much smaller print, but absent from this text, unlike our rest of our books, is that there's no phonetics. So this was designed to perhaps push intermediate speakers to work out the words rather than needing that support through phonetics. I guess also bolding the Munsee and making English smaller is also a political statement, which I guess does hold true to the fact that if you speak your language, then you're also wandering into that political realm of language revitalization and using your language as opposed to the two official languages that are declared here in Canada. As I said before, this book is based on a trip down the Thames. We started off at the forks of the Thames in London, Ontario. Our first trip went down to a small village called Delaware, which took 8 hours. Mark was more than happy to do rough camping at Delaware, but I'm not as limber as I used to be, and my back said there's not a chance that I'm going to be sleeping out on the hard soil when there's a bed that could wait. So we actually did this in 2 trips, and we took all our equipment out to finish off the trip later that September from Delaware, Ontario, all the way to Middlemiss. So it did provide us with some beautiful weather and an opportunity to see the river in one solid calendar year, to see the differences and sort of document as we went. So what I'll do is I'm gonna read from the story, and then once I'm done, I'm gonna pass it over to Katherine so she can talk about the artwork that she applied for the story. And I'll try and hold my speaker closer here because I know I speak fairly low. So ta lakama, wulaakama, yokwai, yapi, Asiiskusiipuw. Yonkwai kishkwik alame amoho dapalikala. Kilona pamahamamina akwi tayakwano. Waak ash shapla. Tayakwanong NEEKAAWA wundamawak. Nakawa tahewak. Wasingwa Chengamakish Wishaposhamak Hualamak Wishakamak Kinhoquist Wisamak. Aqua the Pamahaminya Lawakwawani Ni the Wingaus Shokawi the Wingash Shokawi Waak Damakwa Asino Kak Quinamo. Oh, my mistake. I got ahead of myself here. Kteekhiikeew Ka Quinamo Waak wunjiiyayuw Meetfa Yayapalas Mangiso Huasquas Nalish Yape Quinakwat Wapiskisko. Enda Kilona Alohkawaatwak Ni Nawawikanin Wak Winamandamandaki Shukilona Kawingaw Sawina. And what I'll do is I'm going to pass it over to Katherine so she can talk about the artwork.
Thank you, Ian. I think the first thing that I want to say about this particular story is that sometimes, and this would happen a lot more frequently when I was illustrating like just straight up language books, like vocabulary translated 1 or 2 words per page, is that Ian will send me a list of things, a list of prompts, I suppose, to draw, and a list of like the vocabulary and the words. And on that list will be like about 10 of something. And this time it was fish. I drew a lot of fish. And I did really enjoy it. I think it's sort of a funny anecdote. That just like so many fish came out of this story. And I've learned so much about drawing fish. But I don't know, I think the process for this one was interesting because I had sort of a shorter time period in which I was able to like illustrate it. I remember it was sort of like quickly like, hey, do you want to do this? And I was like, of course I do. but I feel like I learned a lot and I tried out a lot of new things within my art. And I don't know, I feel like my work is very rapidly evolving and ever changing. So a lot of these things, to me, like this was so long ago. But like I see a lot of the work I did, and I'm very proud of, you know, all of the progress I made during this. And I'm also, I don't know, I'm also very proud of like it tells a very full and complete story, and I think that's in part obviously due to Ian's work. But I don't know, I think it just feels very, very feels very comfortable. Feels like a very comfortable story. I just really enjoy, like, I enjoyed illustrating all of the animals. I enjoyed doing all the texture on that. I think that was a very fun project. I tried to make them sort of as tangible as possible without going over into like hyper realism, if that makes sense. So stylistically tangible, as if it's sort of like a real thing you could encounter. Yeah, and I'm very proud of like how nice this feels. It feels very warm. It feels like I was there. I'm fairly sure that's all I have to say for this one. Yeah, it was a very quick process, but I learned a lot, and I had a lot of fun doing it. It was just a very good project all around.
I should say this was a quick turnaround for the to get this finished. The writing piece needed to be done at a certain time, so I had to rush out. An artist had backed out of the work, so I rushed to Catherine to see if she had time to complete the work, which she was able to do. And like she mentioned, I basically sent her a lot of like word lists because they're things that I saw, but she also had to work off of photos that I sent because those were the only things. And it's not as easy when you're paddling a canoe with you know, another sort of bigger fellow, and it's rocking back and forth, and you're trying desperately not to drop your iPhone into the Thames River, right? Because I wanted fairly good photos, but it's so awfully hard to balance when Mark's paddling in the back and then we hit a rock and you suddenly get a beautiful view of you going forward, and you know your camera. But you also look like that guy who really isn't interested in paddling, so you're really not a good paddle partner. You're more of just like putting your feet up kind of thing, and oh, I'll just take photos, right? Or I'll put up this umbrella and keep the sun out of my eyes. So it's a nice, I had to strike a balance with Mark about, you know, photo documentation that I could send to Catherine, but also, you know, sort of pull my weight.
I think I can second that. It was very much like there were quite a few photos that I could work from, but then a lot of it was me just like frantically like Googling photos of the Thames River itself, and just like making sure that like what I was drawing was sort of accurate to what Ian was actually experiencing. You know, rivers can be different, and also like animals can be very like localized, if that makes sense. So it's sort of my, not my burden, my job to make sure that what I'm putting out there is actually accurate to what you would see on this territory, and not just a photo like the first photo I found on Google.
Yeah, I particularly like the picture of the bridge because there were a bunch of people like their fishing rods were out. So I mean, the bridge to me, the picture of the bridge, that worked out really nice because there is several bridges along the Thames that look like that. You know, the bow and the stand just kind of reminded me of my when I was a kid at Blackfriars Bridge in London, where my dad used to live. There's a bridge that looks very similar to that. So it sort of brought me back when she created that of a time where we used to cross the bridge or, you know, walk along the outside where we shouldn't have. So we're thinking we were going to dive in and things like that. So I forgot to mention that you may hear as I read that I have second language tendencies. So Munsee, while I learned it when I was a kid from people who spoke in my house. I'm not a fluent speaker, so I think you'll find that there's things that are missing, and I'll pronounce words incorrectly. And there's lack of intonation, and that's a piece that I think, as a second language person, I'm gonna, have to work at till I'm gone. But it's something that's worth a challenge. So those are things that you'll pick up from the speaking part of things. As well, for all three stories, two stories that are left, writing in the language is actually like having somebody with you. I don't know how to describe that, but Munsee language is one of those endangered languages that the UN has acknowledged, and with very few first language speakers and very few second language speakers, writing is actually sort of that person in the room with you, where you're working out things that you're trying to say. At times you're saying them to yourself, right? So everything sounds good when you're saying it to yourself, but it's also really nice to be able to share it tonight, because I'm going back and going, oh, maybe an error there. Maybe I'll go back and I'll take a look at that. And it's a living document as opposed to a one and done. And I think that's the lovely difference of working with an Indigenous. So sometimes when you're working with academic papers, right, it's like, it's out the door, right? How many times as the university student, I'm done, this essay is finished, I'm never going to see it again, right? Whereas if I work in the language and I'm writing things in the language, it's a living document that needs to go back and have some work done on it to make it make it closer in terms of translation, or to be able to say the appropriate thing. I forgot, the ducks are also one of my favorites. There's this little group of ducks that are walking across, so it's one of my faves too.
I do really enjoy the ducks. I'm glad you actually pointed those two out, because like those were the two that, like, when I was finished, I was like extremely proud of, just sitting at my computer.
So again, before we move on to the next story, I just wanted to say that this came through the work of Karen as well, because Karen was a person who had wrote me in if the story was getting too far, the scope was getting too far, or she provided her proofreading lens on these stories. So oftentimes I'd come to her with an expression and she's, well, could we do it this way? So you'll see elements of that in the story. And of course, the stories are always attributed to those speakers that have helped me out with this creation. You won't see my name, as the sole author. It is a community effort of the speakers at Munsee, Delaware. And again, it's one of those things where you didn't know that was going to be your last summer with someone. And I wish I'd had a tape recorder. I mean, it's that expression, right? We wish we'd taped the generation or the generation, two generations in front of us when we had the opportunity. And I guess I can only ever be grateful for the fact that I got to sit in that canoe for 16 hours. It didn't feel at the end of it like I was all like grateful, because it hurt, but it was a very wonderful trip to listen to a man and to have his son film us while we were out there, to listen to all the stories that he had from a lifetime. So for that, I'll always be grateful. And that's what makes this story, I think, really, really special. So then, did you want to take questions now, or do you want to move to the next story? What do you think?
It's sort of nice to have a little pause to share questions. And I know there's one in the chat, which was from B. Sean Clark, asking, will these stories be published in ebook or audio form at some point? I wonder if that's something you've thought about.
There's a couple of ways that the story can be shared. So it will be available through the History, Culture, and Language website. There's also another option which could come to fruition next year, which is the actual recording of the books, but also done as a short film. So, using Catherine's artwork, but then also doing a much better film work job than I could ever do, right? Than my trusty iPhone. So it would be it's going to be something that's much more sorry, it's going to be handled by people who know what they're doing, not me. So those are two ways in which this story will hopefully be more globally available. But currently, I think I've given away all my copies. They all disappeared after the powwow. So they're in the hands of hopefully people who want to learn.
So we'll just say Laachumohkawaat to everyone, and see you at the next event. We'll have events coming up in the course of the year, and then next February will be, I hope, the 3rd annual story evening. Anishik, Ian, Anishik, Catherine.
Aanihkwaachiimuwak. Laachumohkawaat.
Laachumohkawaat.